So yeah, it's hopeless. Completely and utterly hopeless, 110% hopeless, end of story, period. Now I know I'll bet you, I'm willing to bet anyway, that many of you are probably thinking to yourself, no it isn't, there's always hope. Because that's been the predominant story narrative in our culture, in many cultures, since clay tablets of Gilgamesh right through to the most recent Hollywood films. There is always hope. So it is uncharted territory in a sense to come up here and say, let's embrace hopelessness. I work on the Sustainable Development Goals, and there is no more hopeful, aspirational story than that. These are known as the global goals, and they were signed off at the largest meeting of heads of state ever on our planet that humanity has ever brought together. And they are 17 of the most pressing problems that we could ever face, and we have decided to solve them by the year 2030. That's 12 years from now. These are things like life on land. We need to fix up our situation when it comes to biodiversity and deforestation, or life underwater, our coral reefs, our fisheries. These are things also like gender equality. It's time that we just treated each other equally between the sexes and the genders. Other things like quality education. Well, poverty, let's just take that one. Poverty is so inspirational. We have decided that we are going to end poverty in all of its forms everywhere for everyone. That's the exact wording. Can you imagine that? Like 10, 15 years ago, we would say things like, we want to get rid of half, or we want to uplift half of the people that are living in extreme poverty, which is defined as $1.25 a day. That's about 800 million people right now today. And under these new set of goals, we're going to get 800 million people out of poverty in 800 weeks. Well, that sounds pretty difficult. And some days, when you're working in this business like I do, and everybody else who works very hard at the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, some days you wake up and you go, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it. Like, let's take goal 13, which is about climate change, and I was in the room at both of these meetings. And it is very inspiring to think in goal 13 that we are going to keep our planet under the dangerous threshold of 2 degrees. In fact, we said at the meeting, and we all aspired to this, and everybody chanted it, 1.5 to stay alive. That's what we need to keep our planet at, and we're at 1 degree right now, climbing very quickly. But 2 degrees, well, that's dangerous, and that's not just dangerous, it's dangerous for our species to survive in the biosphere. Well, what's hopeless about it some days is you wake up and you go, geez, I don't know if we're going to make it. Like, they just came out with a report a couple weeks ago. This is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they said 1.5, we're going to hit that in 2032, somewhere between 2032 and 2050. We are going to hit it. And this is the most eminent body who knows what they're talking about. 2 degrees, people say, we're absolutely going to hit in this century. And if you take the business as usual scenarios without any miracles, without everybody turning off the cars, without us getting to zero carbon emissions, etc., we're going to hit 3.5, and that's an inferno. I got a 6-year-old daughter. And what does that mean? What does 4 degrees mean? And that's not the pessimists. The pessimists were the people 10 years ago who said, we're going to have an increase in the intensity and the frequency of climate events. We may see a lot of forest fires. We may see a lot more hurricanes, and they're going to be bigger, and they're going to be more frequent. And we're living that at 1 degree. What does it mean at 7? Because that's what they're saying we're going to hit at the end of this century. So, what good does it do then to come along and say, well, let's be hopeless then, right? It makes no sense. This is the very time to be hopeful. But my perspective is a bit odd, and I'm going to take you back. Like all perspectives, it sort of starts young, and we learn a perspective. And in my case, when I was in elementary school, I was in one of those alternative education programs, and they said, you got your English and your math done, just go study whatever you like. And so off to the library I went, and I studied whatever I wanted. And I came across this big black book once, I think it was 10 or 11 years old. And the book was encyclopedic in nature. It's super fine pages, lots of information, hundreds of black and white photographs, and it was absolutely horrifying. It was about the Holocaust. And I was a kid, I didn't know anything about this, and nobody had told me about this. And I kept it a secret. I studied, and I studied, and I studied this book. I studied about all the things that took place in graphic detail. And I don't know why. As an adult, I've often thought, why did I do that? You can't really remember. But I remember the feeling. And I remember why the feeling was so strong. I felt completely betrayed. I felt betrayed that I'd been living in a bubble. Like, nobody's been telling me about this. Like, I felt betrayed by my parents, by my teachers. I felt betrayed by the world. And it became kind of a theme for me. I wanted to go around, I wanted to break bubbles. I wanted people to know about the 35,000 nuclear warheads that were pointed at each other at that period in history. I wanted people to know about the Central American Wars. I became a filmmaker, and I went off and I made films about things that were going on in El Salvador, the massacres in Guatemala. I made films, got involved in films about using rape as a tool of war in the Bosnian Herzegovinian conflict. Well, you do that for long enough, and I did that for a long time, about 15 years. If you do that long enough, one day you wake up and you go, geez, I don't really like my species much, and I sure don't want to bring a kid into this world. Because you're deep in it all day long. And I realized that's not my natural tendency. And I thought, you're getting deeper and deeper into a funk, and you got to do something about this. And so I thought, well, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the worst case scenario that I can find. And I just want to put a caveat out here, because you don't need to go to where I went to. I went, at that point in time in the news, there were two really, really ugly things going on the planet that stuck out for me. One was the genocide in the Congo, and the other one was a war in Sierra Leone where we were using children to do our worst deeds. And in this case, these children were being used to cut and amputate hands off. The president had said all hands for Sierra Leone, and so the Revolutionary United Front, who was fighting over diamonds, if you can imagine, this is all a fight over diamonds, taking thousands and thousands of children, and they literally sent thousands of hands, and they cut them off. And I thought, well, now that's bad. I'm going to go there. So I went there, right in the middle of the war, everybody's leaving, and I jumped in there. I think I'll make a film about child soldiers, and I'm going to, more than anything, I want to confront what's going on in my heart, in my soul over this situation. And I lived with these kids, and I'm telling you, they taught me a lot. They taught me a lot about hope and a lot about hopelessness. But what happened was, just imagine, you got 12-year-old kids who've shot 86 people when they're 12 years old, or kids like 6 years old with names like Flamethrower. You're 6 years old and you got a name like Flamethrower? That makes no sense to me. And it was really hard on my brain, but what happened was one day I was there, and I heard about these child soldiers really fresh. They just came out of the bush, and they laid down their guns. And I thought, and they were on the edge of Allentown, and the war was going on out there, and there's bombs going off. I thought, I'm going to go out there. So I grabbed a soccer ball, and I went out there, and I kicked the soccer ball around with these kids for a while, get to know them, find out what's going on. Their caregiver, they had stabbed their caregiver at the UN, so they were a pretty rough bunch. And what happened was they kicked the soccer ball and they dropped it down in the middle of the well, and so they went and they grabbed this little kid. His name is Kill Man No Blood. You can imagine where you get a name like that. And they take him by the ankles and then they throw him down there and they're hanging on to him, and he will not get that soccer ball, so they pull him out, and he's running around in some kind of psychotic trance thinking they're going to kill him, and a fight breaks out, and all the boys go and get clubs, and I get in there in my Canadian way and I say, don't stop fighting like this, and I'm getting absolutely nowhere, and all of a sudden out of the darkness, because it was getting dark, I heard this stop it, and it was a 17-year-old kid who was their commander. His name was Civilian Papa. And he just said, and it was electrifying how quickly they stopped. Well, I was impressed with that. So he said, come on over here. He says, it's too dark. You should stay with me. And so we stayed in this bombed out building, and he had some candles, and basically we burned candles to the middle of the night. And he told me his story. And like so many stories, it was absolutely awful. They had lined his whole family up and shot him one by one. And when they got to him, they said, you want to die or you want to fight with us? And he said, I'll fight with you. And that brings me to my first point about hopelessness, which is that it is a fantastic place to bear witness for what is actually going on, not for what you hope is going on. Because hope will throw these blinders on you and you will not be able to see what you can see from a place of complete hopelessness. You can look. You can see. And I've thought about this a lot. Like, what about the Sonder commander who had to see what was going on every day in Auschwitz, in those camps? The second thing that hopelessness does that nothing else can do is it allows you, and Sun Tzu said this in The Art of War, he said, if it's ever hopeless and like there's 10,000 of them, there's only 300 of you, and you're actually going to lose a battle, he said, level with your troops and look them in the eyes and tell them it's hopeless. You're going to die. Because what happens is people change their attitudes. They don't cower in the trench hoping that it's going to work out. They realize, I got to break some rules. I got to think completely differently. And we could use a little bit more of these two qualities right now to really bear witness to where we are on the planet right now. If we are heading to 7 degrees, we need to look each other in the eyes and say, that's our reality. your children, my children, are not going to live in the same world. It's not going to work out. And then we need to start thinking about, well, could we break some rules? Could we think completely differently instead of business as usual? Well, maybe I will. Maybe I'll just step right to outside of the box that we're stuck in and think differently. And this kid did that. This kid did that in a terrible way. And there's different ways you can think outside of the box. You can think creatively and make the world a better place, and we need that. We so desperately need that creative thinking. Well, he did it in a negative way. And the kid said, and I think he had this authority. They said, he's very mean. And what he did is he had thrown 200 people into a mosque, and then he made them come out one by one, like, people with their kids. And they had to pick a lottery ticket for the person in front of them, and they either lost a hand or an eye or an arm. And the other boys had to do the bloodbath. Which brings me to my third point, which is that there's no place like hopelessness to really feel and to yearn and to know what your previous world was like. And think about this. Think about this. Because if you or know anybody, or if you ever get a really nasty prognosis and you realize it's terminal, it's absolutely hopeless, well, I'll tell you, that's when you suddenly realize, my God, I love where I am. I want to live my life. I want to love my kids. I want to tell my mother I love her. I want to tell my girlfriend, my boyfriend. I want to sing. I want to dance. I want to finish my bucket list. I want to do all of the things that it means to be a human, to fulfill our potential. And this kid did that in a negative way. The fourth thing, or the last thing that I want to leave you with, is that, well, hope and hopelessness are actually oriented at the future. Now think about this, because you wake up one day and you feel hopeful, and then the next day you feel hopeless, and the feeling comes and it goes. But you don't come and go. You're always here. Just like right now, I'm here and I'm breathing, and you're hearing me talk, and climate change is somewhere out there in the future. It hasn't hit us yet. At any given time, you are in the ever-present nowness of I amness of right here. And that is a unique place to be able to make decisions from and change the world. Now, this kid figured this out, because what he did is he said to the boys one day, we are going to walk in and I am done. He said, we're going to put down our guns, and I don't care if we get shot. I don't care if we get arrested. I don't care if I go to jail. I'm done. I'm just done. So he wasn't operating from a place of hope or hopelessness. He's operating from slightly before that. Now, here's the thing. I did never said in this talk to throw out hope. There's nothing that I love more than hope. It's motivational. It gets you up in the morning. It allows us to solve problems. And by God, it orients us in a beautiful way. It's very energizing. So hope is like this, but they're like siblings. We throw out no hope, not realizing that it allows us to bear witness. It allows us to radicalize. It allows us to truly feel. Indeed, in my opinion, hope, this one, is born out of hopelessness. This one's an older sibling. Now, what would you do in your life if you understood this as deeply as this kid, this basically child, understood it? Would you operate from that place of nowness where you just instantly make decisions because you know what's right? You don't worry about whether getting the solar panels or buying the Prius, an electric car, or riding your bike's actually going to solve the problem, but you do it just because it's the right thing to do. That's where you're orienting from, this I amness feeling. And I think most of you would know what I'm talking about if you can make your decisions from there. It's going to be a tough, really tough century that we're coming up. And I don't know whether we're going to make it or how. Maybe you have the same questions in your head. But if we can take both of these, hope and we can take hopelessness, and we can allow them to be our guides. You see, we're working from this place of ever-present I amness, and these two things were given to us as gifts. They allow us to navigate a future in which we can take on the toughest problems ever with our eyes wide open, bearing witness, truly feeling, and being radical. Very radical, because that's what we're going to need. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you.